Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? That's the question. We have a president and a vice president who have made the determination that, at least in the case of what happened in Minnesota, we know who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And the most fascinating thing to me in all of this is the question of Renee Good. Was she good or was she bad? And that's the question. If you listened to the Vice President of the United States yesterday, well, it was shades of Spiro Agnew. We have not had in our history a Vice President who has been so outspoken, so clear, so precise in making judgments. Now, Agnew spoke of the nattering nabobs of negativism, and of course, he also spoke about the elite core of impudent snobs. But what J.D. Vance did yesterday was, before any investigation, before any proof could be offered, was to label the young woman killed in Minneapolis, Renee Good, as the villain. She was obviously a leftist. She was obviously agitating. She was obviously preventing law enforcement from doing its job. And that was reinforced by President Trump's comments. But we don't know that to be true. And in fact, what we have seen now is the president, the vice president, the Secretary of Homeland Security, all declaring without any investigation that the outcome is stated and clear, and there is no doubt about it. She was responsible for her own death. Now, it seems to me that the first thing we should know is that the president and the vice president and the Secretary of Homeland Security should understand this is not a political matter. It's a matter of what really happened. And the fact that they have taken a firm stand means that any investigation by legitimate authority, well, how do you defy the judgment of the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of Homeland Security when your government is doing the investigation? This is most assuredly the cart before the horse. I want to be clear here. There is something very wrong. We are seeing it play out as well in other incidents around the country. And one of the most interesting situations is the story now unfolding about a husband and wife who evidently were shot and killed, and we don't know why. And if you listen carefully to all of the observations, one of the things that rang true to me was the statement, "We cannot trust our government." I want to ask you the question. Can we put the partisan divide aside? Can we recognize that the use of ICE really represents a tactical decision by the administration to raise the level of controversy? And that's what bothers me. If we are going to have a week and a weekend filled with tensions, isn't it incumbent upon the government to act responsibly? According to Vance and Trump, we know who the bad guys are. According to objective reporting, we don't know. In fact, this is the critical question. Is this move by the president and the vice president and, yes, the Secretary of Homeland Security purely a move to exacerbate the situation? Let me ask you a question. What is your reaction when the Vice President of the United States says that federal officers have absolute immunity? That's what he said. Absolute immunity. I want to suggest to you that immunity simply because you are an employee of the federal government, well, that's not enough. We face, my friends, a real crisis of confidence. Not only that, we have a president of the United States who is attacking anyone who opposes him and who made clear in a statement yesterday that he is not to be challenged. And most particularly, he directed himself against 5 Republican members of the United States Senate who voted with the Democrats opposing his actions in Venezuela. And the president essentially decided to read them out of the Republican Party. It is a fascinating moment when the president is so empowered that he believes he has that power. And look what happened in the House of Representatives. Enough Republicans crossed the aisle to work with the Democrats to have Obamacare reinstated. That is to say, to see whether or not we can curb the cost of Obamacare. Do you understand that now the president and, yes, the Speaker of the House are very unhappy, and a question is being raised about purging Republican ranks? This is a critical moment because we are being asked to decide who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Should someone who works for the government have absolute immunity? Is a statement by a president or a vice president the law? Are we allowed to have independent investigation? And let me ask you the most fundamental question. If an investigation is launched by the Department of Justice, do you believe it will be fair and impartial? I am upset because I do not like to see law and the rule of law defined by people who may or may not have broken the law themselves. And I choose that turn of phrase very carefully. We don't know what happened in Minnesota. We don't know what happened precisely. But we do know that now the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of Homeland Security have stepped in such a fashion as to prejudice any outcome. Can you imagine the Department of Justice, led by Pam Bondi, coming to a conclusion against the wishes of the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of Homeland Security? That's my question, ladies and gentlemen. This is the corruption of law. This is a president and a vice president asserting that their judgments are above the law. Today would have been Richard Nixon's birthday, January 9th. And I always remember Mr. Nixon in an interview that he did with David Frost saying that if the president does it, it's not illegal. And do you remember the reaction? Do you remember the reaction of people, Democrats and Republicans? Nonsense, we said. The president is not above the law. The vice president is not above the law. We learned that dramatically in the case of another vice president, Spiro T. Agnew. I mentioned him at the beginning of this podcast to point out to you that Agnew was a national hero to the Republicans, that he was the clear front runner for the Republican nomination for president of the United States in 1976 until the Justice Department, an impartial Justice Department, an impartial reaction to the rules of law and the facts of the matter prevailed. And Spiro Agnew went from being the second most powerful man in America, at least theoretically, to a man who lived out his life in disgrace. Now, I am not suggesting that Vice President Vance or President Trump have at this point done anything to deserve the kind of condemnation of the Nixon-Agnew administration. But I am suggesting that when they put themselves above the law, when the president announces he is going to purge Republican senators, when the Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, expresses his extreme displeasure with Republicans who voted their conscience when it came to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and extending the ability for people to afford their medical care, that we have a fundamental problem. It is a problem that must be dealt with. And I'm going to tell you, we are going to keep our eyes and ears open this weekend. We are going to watch what the response is. And we are going to watch and see whether or not ICE is used, misused, abused in incident after incident. May I tell you, this is a very serious matter. But there is another matter that is erupting in the world, which I also need to address today. And that is what is happening in Iran. The explosion in Iran is greater than at any point since the revolution which overthrew the Shah and put in the Islamic State. Right now, Iran is burning. And the president has said, clearly and precisely, that if, in fact, this happens in Iran, if innocent people are killed, the United States will intervene. Now, I don't know whether the president means what he says, but I can tell you, after the lesson of Venezuela, I believe that when he says something, we had better listen carefully. If, in fact, we are ready to act in the case of Iran, and there is more and more talk of the United States backing Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, in an attempt to again come back to Iran and rule it, well, we've got an issue here. And when you have a president who is an interventionist, whether we are talking about Venezuela or Iran or potentially Cuba or potentially Colombia, or in fact, a president of the United States who now is talking about Greenland, these expressions by the president have to be taken seriously. And the nature of who we are, well, are we a Yankee imperialist? Are we the do-gooders of the world? Are we the policemen of the world? All of these questions need to be addressed. I have said before, and I will say again, that when it comes to foreign policy, a president is king. The Senate may have passed a resolution somewhat suggesting the limitation of a president's power in foreign policy. But the president has roundly rejected that notion. The president essentially said, if I say it, that's what it is. And that, my friends, concerns me. I began with a fundamental question. Is the president, is the vice president, are these two individuals respecting the law? Are they respecting the balance of power? Are the actions being taken by the Trump-Vance administration within the rule of law that we have come to acknowledge and respect? It doesn't mean that every decision goes your way, but it means that I want to be able to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. I want complete investigations before conclusions are drawn by our leading public officials. When it comes to foreign policy, you bet I want the Senate and the House involved. I recognize that what I am saying to you at this very moment represents a tremendous challenge to the Trump administration. But this is America, and if there is a dissent, we need to hear it. So the question remains, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And who governs America's foreign policy? These are questions which we are going to be debating and discussing in the days ahead. And although I will not be back until Monday, I want you to know that I will be watching and listening and caring deeply about what unfolds in the next few hours, the next few days, and yes, beyond. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links to the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember, please share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. I want to also point out that we deeply appreciate the positive attention we have been receiving, particularly your willingness to subscribe to this podcast with our advertisers. And of course, I want to thank Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this program. Gogo, we couldn't do it without you. This is John Rothman. Have a great weekend. Follow the news as avidly as I will. And boy, will we have a lot to talk about on Monday. I am John Rothman, and you are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you next time.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.